Hey everyone, so this is Becca from the Chapter 6 group, and we're going to be talking about purchasing. So, what is purchasing? It's a management function focused on securing resources, and there are a bunch of things you need to think about in that process. Most importantly, the correct food at the right times, and you need to be aware of standards. There is some basic steps that basically all purchasing processes follow. You need to identify needs, determine specific standards, estimate the quantities needed, calculate amount of inventory, identify amounts to buy, write your purchase order, conduct market research on potential vendors, and then select and negotiate with vendors. The market. Today's market provides a vast amount of options, so consumers need to be well informed to cater to needs of a specific food service. So there are a bunch of different definitions of the market, but in regards to purchasing, it covers moving a product from the original source to the point of service. It can also refer to raw agricultural products, a geographic location of a certain food source, or the activities that result in transfer of ownership of a product. Market distribution. So this states that products are distributed through a series of market channels and transfer of ownership. With each exchange of ownership, the product is transformed and the cost increases along the way, so consumers end up paying for the increase in cost. Recently, there's a surge of interest in cutting out the middleman and getting more products more directly. But within the market distribution, the most common middlemen are the broker and the manufacturer's representative. Understanding the market. Consumers need to be alert to conditions in the food market, such as adverse weather, government policy, economic trends, and global trading. Exchange of information is vital, and today we're lucky that we have the internet, so you can get that information pretty much anywhere, anytime. Price is the most important variable to the consumer. Seasons, weather, and demand can change availability, and then that will affect the price. Market regulation. So food shipped interstate means it must follow federal laws and regulations. Food shipped intrastate, which is within the state, must meet state and local regulations that are at least equal to federal requirements. So the USDA is responsible for inspection of meat, poultry, and processed foods. The FDA is responsible for inspection of production, manufacture, and distribution of all interstate commerce foods, except for meat, poultry, and eggs, which USDA handles. The National Marine and Fisheries Service is a voluntary inspection system for fish products. The FDA is another big part of market regulation, and they have some food definitions that are very important. So adulterated food contains substances injurious to health, might be filthy, decomposed, prepared or held in unsanitary conditions, portions of diseased animals. There's also misbranded food, which the label does not include required information. Standards of identity is what a food must contain to be called what it is. Standards of quality is a limited number of defects allowed on canned fruits and vegetables. And standards of fill regulate how full a container must be to avoid deceiving the consumer. And then we have the U.S. Public Health Service. They are in charge of controlling infections and contagious diseases, inspection of shellfish and milk, standards of sanitation. And then the EPA regulates pesticides and quality of water. And the Department of Treasury monitors production of alcoholic beverages over 7% alcohol.
Hey everyone, my name is Amy Perkinson, and I'm going to be presenting on the second part of Chapter 6, which is the buyer and then the food vendor. And I'm going to be giving you some additional information about what's already present on each of the slides. So the first slide is about the buyer. And so essentially the buyer is like an agent, and it's the duty of whoever is purchasing the food to communicate effectively with the buyer what it needs so that the quality, quantity, and the time of delivery are adequate and correct. So it requires a lot of cooperation on both the buyer's part and the food service companies to honor the quality standards and the quantity and make sure that the timing of everything is correct. So the buyer must have knowledge of all the legal requirements and understand what parameters they have authority around in regards to their decision making about can they change something based on quality standards, or can they decrease the quantity of something and increase the quantity of something else. And that's something that needs to be discussed between the food service company and the buyer. So negotiation is a skill that is needed by a buyer, and it's something that can be learned and perfected over time. These skills up at the top also help to create effective specifications and contracts that the buyer needs to create between them and the vendor. And the buyer needs to stay current with all of the trends so that they can perform their job the most effectively. And they need to ensure that operational needs and limitations are well understood, and they need to be familiar with storage space and things like that so that food or other products doesn't come in and then the company doesn't have anywhere to store them. So the ethics, maintaining good ethics is very important because the buyer is subjected to a lot of bribes and bad influences. The buyer could accept something of value in exchange for a sale, and that would be considered a kickback, and that's not maintaining good ethics. There's also things such as free lunches and holiday gifts and free samples that could all be considered conflicts of interest if not discussed properly and understood exactly what's happening by the buyer and the person who is giving those products away. So the structure of purchasing varies, depends on the organization, and the different things that an organization needs to consider are the size, the ownership, and the geographical location. And based on those things, one of these two types is decided upon: centralized purchasing or group and cooperative purchasing. So centralized purchasing is a system that is cost-effective and time-saving for individual units who are not responsible for purchasing all of the goods and needs things that are needed. So this would be a large organization such as a university or a hospital that has one person that is in charge of buying all of the supplies for that entire hospital. So the food service area is not going to need the same things as the nurse's station, but one person is in charge of buying all of those things. And each individual unit usually has an allocation of a small budget that they're allowed to use to purchase certain things, but all large purchases or mass orders go through a central office. So the disadvantages of this is that there could be friction or tension because there's no clear rules of who has authority for things like quality control or things like that. And so that can cause tension between the smaller units and the central office. So group and cooperative purchasing would be something like a school, a hospital, and the nursing home in a small community coming together and combining their purchases into one order. The buyer is independent from the organization, and the organizations all agree upon common specifications to that which the buyer has to uphold and maintain. So the advantages of this is that there's the price advantage for ordering in bulk, and it's also time saving for these smaller businesses where the paperwork is all streamlined, and the buyer is responsible for a lot of that. So there's also group purchasing organizations or GOPs. And the GOPs negotiate with a list of vendors to get all of the different needs of the institution met. So not one vendor is supplying everything, but lots of smaller vendors are. And all purchasing for government level organizations must obey policies in place. So now we're going to talk about the vendors and food distributors. So food services have a choice of who they get their supplies from, and it's an important decision to make and really understand what you're doing with those. So Broadline, which is a category of vendor, is like a very large company such as Cisco, and they supply all of the needs that you would need. So it applies all the plates and all of the food and everything that you would need. And it allows for lots of discounts if you do that, and a convenience. Whereas there's specialty, which carries a limited type of product. So one company may only provide the produce, and you'd have to go somewhere else for your meat. And that's something if you want to do local things or whatnot. So there's a number of different factors to consider when choosing a vendor. So there's the scope of all the different products, how available they are, what's readily available, their delivery schedule. There's also things called value added, which is getting something for free if you purchase something else. So like a buy one, get one, or when you purchase two, you get one free. If in a large area, several suppliers could meet the standards desired, and so you need to choose what small parameters you think would best benefit you and that company offers. And if you're in a smaller rural area, supplies may need to be local, and you need to ensure that they have the adequate stock that you would need to order, and that the quality and quantity are there. So that's everything for my section, and I hope that it all makes sense.
Hey y'all, I'm Alex, and I'm going to be talking about methods of purchasing and product selection. There are two methods of buying: informal or open market, and formal competitive bid buying. Purchasing is a management function, meaning the food service administrator will have policies and procedures to guide them in setting up a course of action. The selected method of buying depends on certain factors, including institutional policies, the size of the organization, the amount of money available, the location of vendors, and the frequency of deliveries. Informal open market buying is a common method of buying, especially in smaller food service operations. The system involves ordering needed food and supplies from a selected vendor from a selected list of vendors based on daily, weekly, or monthly price quotation. Buyers may request daily prices for fresh produce, but may use a monthly quotation list for grocery items. The order is placed after consideration of price in relation to quality, delivery, and other services offered. Contact is made between the buyer and vendor. Considering new vendors allows the buyer to examine what is available from other vendors and to note the current prices. The buyer and vendor must agree on quantities and price before delivery. Only vendors who give reliable service and competitive prices should be considered for open market buying. Formal competitive buying involves written specifications and estimated quantities needed submitted to vendors. Attaches an invitation for them to quote prices within a stated time for the items listed. Requests may be formal and advertised, or less formal, with single copies supplied to interested vendors. Bids open on a certain date. Contract is generally awarded to the vendor with the best prices and meet specifications. Purchasing agents for local, state, or federal are required to submit bids to all qualified vendors. Private organizations, however, are different. They may select the companies with whom they wish to invite to bid. Advantages of formal buying. Found advantageous by large food services or multiple unit organizations. Minimizes the possibility of misunderstanding with regards to quality, price, and delivery. And is satisfactory for canned goods, frozen products, staples, and other non-perishable foods. Disadvantages of formal buying.
Formal buying is not good for perishable items because of the day-to-day fluctuation in market prices. It is also time-consuming and can lead to manipulation when large amounts of money are involved. Formal bidding variations. There are many variations depending on the type of institution. Firm fixed price, FFP contract. Price is not subject to adjustment during period of contract. Places maximum risk on vendor. Used when definite specifications are available and when fair market prices can be delivered daily as needed. Terms of the written bidding system vary across the country, but all of them basically are invitations to bid with the conditions of the bid clearly specified. Attached to invitations include listing of merchandise needed, specifications and quantities involved, any conditions related to supply and fluctuation in the market. Variations on methods of purchasing continued. Cost plus purchasing. A buyer agrees to buy certain items from a vendor on an agreed upon period of time based on a fixed markup over the vendor's cost, and is effective for large volume buying. Prime vending. A formal agreement with a single vendor to supply the majority of products needed. Needs are generally specified in percent of total use by category based on the commitment to the purchase the specified amounts for the specified period of time. The advantages of prime vending include reduced prices, time saving, and the development of strong partnership. Blanket purchase agreement, BPA, used when a wide variety of items are purchased from local suppliers, but the exact items, quantities, and deliveries are not known in advance and may vary. Established with one or more vendors. Just-in-time purchasing, JIT, an inventory and production planning strategy where the product is purchased in the exact quantities required for the specific production run and delivered just in time to meet production demands. Used in an effort to maximize cash flow. The advantages include better space management and fresher produce. Market forms of food. Numerous factors should be considered when selecting products for the food service operation. Deciding on form of which food is to be purchased is a major decision that requires careful study. Factors and considerations of make or buy decisions. Quantity. Evaluate whether quantity standard as defined by and for the organization can be achieved. Equipment. Assess availability, capacity, and batch turnover time to ensure the product demand can be met. Labor. Evaluate availability, current skills, and training needed. Time. Evaluate product setup, production, and service time based on forecasted demands for the product. Inventory. Gauge needed storage and holding space. Total cost. Conduct complete cost analysis of all resources expanded to make or buy product. Use cost as a decision basis after all other factors have been carefully analyzed. Food quality. Top grade isn't always necessary. Lower grade products are wholesome and have essentially the same nutritional value, but differ mainly in appearance and sometimes in flavor. Quality standards. Quality refers to wholesomeness, cleanliness, or freedom from undesirable substance. Describes degree of perfection in shape, uniformity of size, and freedom from blemishes. May also describe the extent of desirable characteristics. Assessments of quality include grade, brand, or conditions. Grades. Market classifications of quality reflect the relationship of quality to the standard. And so close.
Hi everyone, my name is Tabitha and I want to talk to y'all about some of the purchasing procedures. So first we need to identify the needs. In order to identify needs, we need to study menus and recipes to determine the quantity needed. We also need to check into our staples and our other supplies that are used to run the organization and determine, are they low? Do we need to order more? What we need to do. Once we know our needs, we need to submit a request to purchase or a requisition. There's an example of this form on the right-hand side of your screen. Once this form is submitted, the purchasing procedure starts. Let's move on to how do we know what to buy? So first we need to have an inventory stock level, which means we need to have a minimum and a maximum stock. The minimum stock is the number of a product that the inventory should not fall below. This number is determined by looking at usage and the time required for delivery. The maximum quantity is when there is a safety stock number plus the estimated usage in order to get the maximum we have. We need to study past trends and use these trends to predict a forecast of what we may need. The quantity you need to purchase is based on portion size, projected number of servings needed, and a consideration to the preparation and cooking losses. So something gets burned, it's no good, we need to have a backup. Orders are based on the amount needed to keep the inventory up to a desired level. When purchasing foods, products such as milk, bread, and other perishables are ordered and delivered daily or several times a week, while canned foods are purchased less often. When making orders, we need to be specific. Specification is a detailed description of a product stated in terms that are clearly understood by both the buyer and the seller. When you're being detailed, it is best if the description is brief but dense in detail so there are no misunderstandings. The necessary information to have a strong specification is the name of the product, the federal grade or brand, the unit on which price is quoted, the name and size of the container, the count per container or approximate number per pound. Some of these categories require more information, such as the name of the product. You may have one broad brand that offers sugar-free and maybe a sugar substitute, and then regular. You need to be specific in this to be sure you get what you want. You need to issue a bid request after this. An invitation to bid gives vendors an opportunity to submit bids for items needed by a buyer. So they're able to look at what a buyer needs and suggest that the buyer buys their product. The bids originate in the office of the purchasing agent, and the general conditions of acceptance are outlined in the bid. This bid includes the quantities and the specific specifications for the items we are looking for. To the right, you see a form that is an example of a bid request and has information on what product the buyer is seeking, as well as the terms for accepting the bid. You can also use a bid request to request samples that you want to test to determine if you want their product or not. So after you determine what you need to develop a purchase order. Who can develop a purchase order? An authorized purchasing agent, a food service director, or a buyer. How do they know what to purchase? They collect the purchase request or requisitions, and they also communicate with the individual units in the food service system. So you have your people that do breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You want to talk to all of them to be sure that they don't think anything needs to change with the amount that you are ordering. When you're placing an order, you need to include the quantity you need, the quality specifications, who is placing the order, who is allowed to sign for the order, and the desired delivery date. So after you place bids and you receive bids back, you need to tabulate and evaluate them. So before accepting a bid, you need to consider, does the bidder have the ability to perform the contract and provide the services in their required capacity? Can the bidder provide the service promptly and within the specified time? What is the integrity and the reputation of the bidder? What is the quality of the bidder's service on previous contracts of services? Does the bidder comply with laws and the specifics of contracts and services? What are the bidder's financial resources? Samples can be requested for the purpose of comparing the actual product to the specifications to be sure that they align. After being tested, a bid can either be accepted or denied. When a bid is denied, a complete statement of why this product has been denied should be prepared and filed for future reference. So after you find the person you want to accept their bid, you need to award them a contract. The most responsible and responsive bidder with the most beneficial price to the buyer is the one who should get the contract. Included in the contract should be services rendered, dates and method of deliveries, inspection requests, grade certifications that are required, procedures for substitutions, and how the vendor is to be paid. A contract represents the legal acceptance of the offer made by the successful bidder. This is a binding contract in which both parties have to hold up their end of the deal. The bidder is going to provide the food being purchased, and the purchaser is going to pay the bidder. All bidders should be notified whether their bid has been accepted or denied, and in some cases provided the piece of paper stating why their bid has been denied. There are various regulations in purchasing. The buyer is always responsible for understanding and complying with the law. An example would be the local policy on special consideration for minority-owned vendors. The buyer should work with a legal team to help them comply with the applicable legislation. A buyer isn't always going to understand every law they need to follow, so it's important that we have a legal team to inform us on what we need to do properly. There are three categories in purchasing legislation. One would be laws that focus on content and language. Another would be topics of fair competition and pricing. And the last would be addressing issues of fraud and food safety. Law and contract management. The legal aspects of a purchase/sale exchange are covered in the Uniform Commercial Code. Article 2 of this code is highly important because it addresses purchase and sales transaction. There are three categories under protection of contract management. There is the law of agency, which defines the buyer's authority to act for the organization. There's the law of warranty, which defines warranty as a supplier's promise that a product will, in fact, perform as specified. There's the law of contract, which is a contract is an agreement between two or more parties. What components are included in a contract? There is an officer, an acceptance, consideration, competent parties, and legality. There are laws relating to competition and pricing, and this deals with fair competition and pricing. There are 4 laws encompassing this category, which would be the Sherman Act, which prohibits conspiracy and or collusion where the intention is to restrict trade and interstate commerce. There's the Fair Trade Commission Act, which enables the Federal Trade Commission to challenge companies that promote unfair competition through deception in advertising and promotions. The Clayton Act, which is closely related to the Sherman Act and makes it unlawful for a supplier to require purchase of one product before allowing the purchase of another. And the Robinson-Patman Act, which protects buyers from unfair pricing strategies. And this is all I really wanted to share with you about purchasing procedures. Our group would like to leave you with the discussion question of, do you feel that the amount of regulation in the purchasing process is appropriate or too much? Which regulation seems to be the most vital to the purchasing process working smoothly? We hope you gained something from watching our video. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact one of us.